We're going to carry on in our series in the Gospel of Luke. So 2 weeks ago in our last big church, Marie did a great job and unpacking or leading us through chapter 19. We're slowly getting through Luke. We've been going for a number of months. We're finally here today at Luke chapter 20. And this, as Marie mentioned 2 weeks ago in chapter 19, Jesus has arrived in Jerusalem. Jesus' ministry is in Jerusalem. Jerusalem is the place where Jesus is going to go to the cross, where he's going to be beaten, he's going to be crucified. And so you can see as we get to this chapter, the urgency of Jesus, the intensity of Jesus is starting to increase. Because the end, or the cross, is really in sight now. We're getting close to the cross. That urgency, that intensity. It's time to stop messing around. Like the harsh reality of what's about to happen is right there in touching distance. And so we're going to be in Luke 20, but really what I want to do, we don't have time this morning to unpack the whole chapter. So we're just going to hone in and focus on the parable that you'll find in chapter 20. But before we get there, I want you to understand that there's anger building between the religious leaders, the chiefs, the scribes, all the different religious sects. They're getting furious. There's anger building and developing. Just in chapter 19, we had this moment where Jesus had the triumphant entry into Jerusalem. He came riding on a donkey. And the people were excited and they were happy and they shouted, "Hosanna, glory to God, praise to God." This is a messianic picture of a savior, of a deliverer, of someone who's bringing hope. And he arrives on a donkey and the palm branches, this is what we know as Palm Sunday, the palm branches go out. And this is the response in this moment in chapter 19, verse 39. Some of the Pharisees in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, rebuke your disciples." They're not happy. They're getting angry. They've been seeing this Jesus guy going around making outrageous claims, doing outrageous things, and they're not happy. There's this anger that's building. And then we get the end of chapter 19, and there's this moment where Jesus, as Marie talked about, he clears the temple. He starts flipping tables. He's furious. He's seeing that the temple is being defiled. And he's angry and he's responding. And he's driving out of the temple those who are selling. And this is the response in verse 47 of chapter 19. Every day he, Jesus, was teaching at the temple, but the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the leaders among the people were trying to kill him. You're getting a picture. They're not happy. That's just an understatement. They want to kill him. They're furious. There's things about Jesus that are touching right at the core of their hearts. And then again, as we enter into chapter 20, we have this moment where they're trying to trap Jesus. Multiple times you'll see throughout the chapter. They're questioning Jesus. They're trying to trap him, put him into situations so that they have evidence that they could arrest him and bring him to what they see as justice. This outrageous character, Jesus. And so just as he's cleared the temple, he's flipped the tables, this is what they start to challenge his authority. This is verse 2 of chapter 20. "Tell us by what authority you are doing these things," they said. "Who gave you this authority?" And this is an interesting moment. Jesus asks them a question back, and they don't have the answer, so they don't give a response. And so then Jesus says, I won't give you a response to your question. Which, could you imagine? They're already furious. They're trying to kill him. They just want an answer. And Jesus is like playing games with them. He's not following how they want to do things. And then Jesus says, "Well, let me tell you a story. Once upon a time," can you imagine this moment? These angry, furious religious leaders, and Jesus wants to tell a story. So let's turn to that parable. Let's turn to that story. This is going to be in verse 9 of chapter 20. And we're going to walk through it together this morning. So here we go. Verse 9. He went on to tell the people this parable. A man planted a vineyard, rented it to some farmers, and went away for a long time. At harvest time, he sent a servant to the tenants so they would give him some of the fruit of the vineyard. But the tenants beat him and sent him away empty-handed. He sent another servant, but that one also they beat and treated shamefully and sent away empty-handed. He sent still a third, and they wounded him and threw him out. Let's just hit the pause button for this parable. We've got this characters are developing. We've got a vineyard owner who is God. We've got the vineyard that's Israel. We've got the farmers or the tenants who are these religious leaders. And we've got servants who are the prophets. They would have instantly known exactly what's going on here, the story. They wouldn't have had to guess who these characters are that Jesus is talking about in the parable. And they send the first servant, the first prophet. And then they send the second prophet. And then they send the third prophet, the vineyard owner. God is sending these servants. And there's just this these servants are progressively being treated worse and worse and worse. It starts off how they were just beat and sent away empty-handed, and then they were beaten and shamed. And in an honor-shame culture, it's starting to, the listeners are starting to understand the severity, the intensity. There's just this progressively getting worse and worse, and then finally that third one, beaten and physically harmed, wounded, and threw him out. And we get to the point where how much is the vineyard owner going to tolerate? This violence and this insult against his servants, how much is he going to tolerate? What's his response going to be? This is outrageous behavior. This is unacceptable behavior. It's his land. He sent his servants, and they are trying to take over it, and they're just beating and wounding and shaming and sending back empty-handed these servants. This is outrageous. And then the parable carries on. Then the owner of the vineyard said, "What shall I do?" There's this moment. What's the vineyard owner going to do with the anger that's been generated by injustice? What's his response going to be? This has become a personal insult. He sent his own servants who come in his name, under his authority, with his direction. 1, 2, 3 have been sent back empty-handed, beaten, wounded. This is a personal insult against the vineyard owner. This is unacceptable, outrageous behavior. Will the vineyard owner let the tenants win? What will he do? And there's almost this moment where the vineyard owner is honor bound to respond. On behalf of his servants, on behalf of those he sent, he's just honor bound to respond. It's expected. He must respond. He should respond. And to be honest, there's only really one response that would be appropriate in such outrageous behavior, unacceptable circumstances. This landowner, this vineyard owner, he's in a position of power, position of responsibility. He has every right to contact the authorities. And in a moment, they could have a huge group of people who are heavily armed, highly trained, could come in and storm the vineyard and let the tenants know exactly where they lie on the pecking order, that this is unacceptable behavior, this is outrageous behavior, and that this is not going to be tolerated, this is not acceptable. We're going to let you know exactly how we feel, and we're going to bring you to justice. This is what's at the vineyard owner's hands. This is almost like an expectation. What is the vineyard owner going to do with the anger that's been generated from injustice? And there's almost a moment in the parable where the vineyard owner pauses. Then the owner of the vineyard said, "What shall I do?" There's a moment of reflection. There's a moment of pausing. And you can imagine he's processing every single emotion. He's processing the anger and the frustration and the disappointment and the sadness and the humiliation and the shame. And he's processing this in this moment in the parable. And the question is, how is he going to respond? And then the parable carries on. I will send my son, whom I love. Perhaps they will respect him. He's going to send his son. He's going to send his son, whom he loves, the beloved son. Are you crazy? He's going to send his son with the memories of his servants fresh in his mind, beaten, wounded, rejected, shamed. He's going to send his son, whom he loves, unarmed and alone. He's sending his son into the lion's den. These tenants, they're waiting. They know what they've done. They are expecting a response from the landowner. They're ready. They can only imagine what's going to come at them. And there's this lion's den almost that the son is being sent into. It's almost like, is this outrageous stupidity? What is the vineyard owner thinking? This must be outrageously stupid to send his son, whom he loves, the beloved son. He sent him alone, unarmed, into the lion's den. There's almost this moment where the vineyard owner is hoping that total vulnerability will appeal to the long-forgotten sense of honor and respect and goodness in the wicked hearts, the violent hearts of the tenants. It's almost as if the vineyard owner's like, if you can just receive and accept the authority of the son, and if you can just pay your rent, then we can just be done with this whole thing. We can put it behind us. We can move on from this incident. We can move on from this circumstance. If there's just an ounce, all I need is an ounce. If I can just appeal to that ounce of goodness or that ounce of respect or that ounce of honor, I'll give total vulnerability. If I can just capture that, we can be done with this. We can move on from this. And we have here in the vineyard owner a person who's in a position of power, who has the ability to exact vengeance on his enemies, but he chooses not to. He chooses to put his anger far away. He chooses to turn his anger from this injustice into grace. And there's this moment, this is the pinnacle, this is the central part of the whole parable. He sends his son, whom he loves. He sends his beloved son. Total vulnerability. This is outrageous grace. Outrageous grace. There's been outrageous behavior from the tenants. It seems to be outrageously stupid decision from the vineyard owner. And yet this is just an extraordinary moment of outrageous patience, of long suffering, of risk taking. This is an incredibly risky thing to do. He does not know what the response of the tenants is going to be. It's outrageous, self-emptying love. And if there's something we can see here, this is how Jesus responds to us. This outrageous grace. If you're here this morning in person, if you're online, and you're doubting your value, you're doubting your significance, you're doubting whether you're loved, he sent his son. If you're here doubting whether you have any value to bring, any purpose, he sent his son. Outrageous grace, outrageous risk, outrageous self-emptying love. And then the parable carries on. But when the tenants saw him, they talked the matter over. You got this picture, the tenants, they see the sons coming. And the question is, as the listeners are on the edge, like, how are the tenants going to respond? Total vulnerability, outrageous grace, sends his beloved son alone, unarmed, into the lion's den. How are they going to respond? Is there a glimmer of goodness? Is there just an ounce of honor? Is there just an ounce of respect? Can he appeal to that? What's their response going to be? It's almost like this is the most critical decision the tenants will ever make in their life. How are they going to respond? This is how they respond. This is the heir, they said. Let's kill him and the inheritance will be ours. So they threw him out of the vineyard and killed him. The inheritance will be ours. That just the local laws would have, at the time when title ownership and issues would have been complicated and difficult to really determine, it was understood that if you managed to possess the land for at least 3 years, you could be the owner. There's a recognition here, the tenants, like, if we can just hold this vineyard for 3 years and possess it, we can have it all. And we can be the owners. And there's a moment in this parable where Jesus is trying to teach the people around him, like, the inheritance isn't land, the inheritance isn't a nation, the inheritance is his kingdom, his rule and his reign. The kingdom is a new world where he rules and reigns supremely. But they wanted to be the owners. They wanted the inheritance for themselves. And what do they do? Verse 15 here. So they threw him out of the vineyard and killed him. It's interesting. They didn't even want to kill him inside the vineyard because the blood and the corpse would defile the grapes and make the grapes worthless. So they would actually take him outside the vineyard to kill him. This is outrageous behavior. This is wickedness. This is evil. The landowner, the vineyard owner, has shown total vulnerability. He's appealed to them. When he could have just come down and brought the hammer, he sends his son, his beloved son, unarmed, alone. Outrageous grace. And then the parable carries on. What then will the owner of the vineyard do to them? He will come and kill those tenants and give the vineyard to others. When the people heard this, they said, God forbid. There's this moment where the tenants, they failed to see that they were renters and not owners. Their role was to be renters, and they wanted to be owners. They failed to see that the fruit of this inheritance was not for their exclusive use. It wasn't just for them. And for us, as we want to seek after Jesus, we want to be followers of Jesus, we can find ourselves going down the exact same road as the tenants. If we don't understand that we're renters and not owners. If we don't understand that the fruits of the inheritance, the fruits of the kingdom, the rule and reign of Jesus, the kingdom that we get to experience in its in a small amount, not its fullness, it's not for our exclusive use. As soon as we begin to think that it's all for us, we end up going down the same road as the tenants. Go back to the Abrahamic covenant. We've been blessed to be a blessing. We've been blessed to be a blessing. To give it away, give it away, give it away. And then the parable carries on. It says, Jesus looked directly at them and asked them, what is the meaning of that which is written? The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. Everyone who falls on that stone will be broken to pieces. Anyone on whom it falls will be crushed. This is Jesus is quoting from Psalm 118 here. The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. The stone is Jesus. The builders are the religious leaders. The religious leaders have rejected Jesus. And it's almost like Jesus is quoting Psalm 118 to say, one day all will see that Jesus is going to be the cornerstone. The keystone that holds everything together, and the keystone that is the standard by which everything and everyone will be judged. The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. And we see in this parable these two themes of grace and judgment. Hand in hand together. Outrageous grace, overflowing grace, abundant grace. And yet also that doesn't mean that judgment doesn't exist, and judgment won't have a time and a place. Jesus rejected, every eye will see that Jesus is the cornerstone. The keystone that holds everything together, and the keystone that becomes the standard by which everything and everyone is judged. So I just want to, as we come to a close, I want to put this picture back up. And we find ourselves, as we again read the words of Jesus, look at the life of Jesus, this parable, we find ourselves having an invitation from Jesus. Once again, this invitation to come, follow me. This call for Jesus that we, his disciples, we followers of him, the people of God, that we would declare that the Spirit is alive, that the kingdom is advancing, that the church is being built, and that Jesus rules supremely. Through our words and deeds, that we would be visible demonstration of the kingdom life, of this reality, that the Spirit is alive, that the kingdom is advancing, that the church is being built, that Jesus is ruling supremely, that we would be a visible demonstration of that reality. And then it poses the question, how do we cultivate that kingdom life? That's a great question as we go into our small churches next week. How do we cultivate the kingdom life? I want to suggest that it starts by us cultivating a life close to the King. As we cultivate lives that are close to the King, the kingdom life starts to become part of our lives, the rhythms and the practices and the habits that we enter into. And then just one final question, what it leaves us with is, what life are we cultivating? Because whether we do it intentionally or unintentionally, we're cultivating some life. Is it the kingdom life?